You're standing at the foot of it and you cannot take it all in. You have to tip your head back and keep tipping it until your neck aches, and the thing still hasn't stopped going up. A wall of pale stone blocks, each one about as tall as you are, stacked and stacked into the desert haze until the top of it seems to lean back into the sky. There's almost nobody here, just the wind and the sand and this mountain that people made by hand block by block 45 centuries ago. And the question that lands in your chest standing at the bottom of it is the same question that lands in everybody's chest. Not who, not why, just how. How on earth did they do this? No engines, no cranes, no steel, no hydraulics, no diesel, no power tool of any kind. Just rope and copper and wood and water and muscle and time. Somebody moved more than 2 million of these blocks and stacked them into the most precise mountain in the history of the world, and then, somewhere down the long slope of the years, we half forgot exactly how. So let's work it out. Not with mysteries. Let's work it out the way I'd work out any job on any site. The materials, the weights, the logistics, the boring, beautiful arithmetic of it. Because the real answer is so much better than any of the nonsense you've probably been told. My name's Dan, and I build things for a living. Or, let me be honest, I spend my days arguing about building things. I'm a structural engineer, 20-odd years in a hard hat, on modern sites, with the drawings and the load calculations and the crane hire and the concrete pour and the safety inspector, and the budget that everyone swears blind will hit and nobody, ever, actually hits. That's my world. And I need to tell you something about how I look at this thing behind me, because it isn't how you might expect an engineer to look at it. I don't feel clever standing here. I don't feel superior with my computers and my cranes. I feel jealous, because I know, in my bones, exactly what it takes to put up a building a fraction of this size, with a tower crane and steel, and a machine that does the sums in a heartbeat. And I know that we still run late, and run over budget, and cut corners when the foreman thinks nobody's looking. And I know that half of what we throw up today will be a stain and a demolition permit in 100 years. And these people with copper tools and rope and their bare organized hands built the tallest structure on planet Earth. And it is still, right now, standing there. So no, I am not going to tell you it was aliens. I'm going to tell you what it actually was. Sit tight. It's better than aliens, and we have to get this out of the way first because it's in the room whether we like it or not. You have heard the stories. That it must have been visitors from the stars, that there was some lost super-civilization with technology we've forgotten, some secret power source, some trick that got wiped from the record. People say it, I think, out of a kind of backhanded respect. They look at this, and they simply cannot believe that ordinary human beings that long ago could have pulled it off. So they reach for a shortcut. Somebody must have helped them. And I want to be careful here because I don't say this to sneer at anybody. But as an engineer, that explanation actually makes me a little angry because it steals the credit. It looks at the single greatest feat of organized human labor ever attempted and it says, "Nah, couldn't have been us." And that's exactly backwards. There is no evidence, none, anywhere for aliens or lost machines. There is a mountain of evidence, some of it dug up only in the last few years, for something far more impressive. Human beings, tens of thousands of them, fed and housed and organized and paid, solving one hard problem after another with rope and ramps and river water and sheer relentless coordination. The mystery isn't the marvel. The organization is the marvel. Let me show you. First, the scale, because you have to feel the numbers before any of the how makes sense. This is the Great Pyramid of Giza. It was built for a pharaoh named Khufu. The Greeks later called him Cheops in Egypt's 4th dynasty, around 2,560 years before Christ. That's about 4,500 years ago. To give you a handle on that, this pyramid was already more ancient to the Romans than the Romans are to us. Cleopatra lived closer in time to the first moon landing than she did to the building of this thing. It is deep, deep time. Now the build itself. The best estimates put it at somewhere around 2.3 million stone blocks. 2.3 million. The average block weighs about 2.5 tons. That's heavier than a car, every single block, more than 2 million times over. And that's just the average. Deep inside, over the burial chamber we call the King's Chamber, there are granite roofing beams that weigh somewhere between 25 and 80 tons each. 80 tons. That's the weight of a loaded, articulated lorry, lifted up and set down with a jeweler's precision, 60-odd meters in the air, by people who had never seen a wheel with an engine behind it. It stood, when it was finished, about 146.5 meters tall. And hold on to this one, because it's the number that undoes me every time. It remained the tallest structure built by human hands anywhere on Earth for around 3,800 years. Let that land. From the pharaohs, through the whole of ancient Greece, through Rome, through the fall of Rome, through the Middle Ages, for nearly 4,000 years, nobody built anything taller. My industry has never held a record like that and never will. We'd be thrilled if a stadium lasted 50. And it isn't just big, it's precise. The base, an area you could fit several city blocks inside, was leveled so that from one corner to another it's off by only a few centimeters. A few centimeters across that entire enormous footprint. And the four sides are lined up with the points of the compass, true north, south, east, west, to within a tiny fraction of a single degree. I want you to understand what that means to a builder. On my sites with laser levels, with GPS, with digital theodolites, we fight to hold tolerances looser than that on a job the size of a supermarket. They held it on a monument the size of a hill. So the question isn't was it hard? The question is, how? And the answer comes in pieces. Let's take them one at a time. Piece one. Who actually did the work? Because the picture in your head is probably wrong and it matters, and it's one of the places where the evidence has really turned in the last few decades. The old image, the one from the films, is a sea of whipped slaves, dragging stone under the lash, dying in their thousands. And for a long time people simply assumed that. It felt right. How else would you get that much labor? But then archaeologists dug right next to the pyramids and they found the workers. Not a fantasy, the actual town where the builders lived. They found bakeries big enough to feed thousands. They found breweries. They found the remains of enormous quantities of bread and beer and cattle and fish. These people were being fed, and fed well, on a scale a slave economy simply doesn't bother with. They found barracks and workshops. And most movingly of all, they found the workers' own tombs, modest tombs, yes, but proper ones, laid out with care, right in the shadow of the kings. Slaves don't get buried with honor next to the pharaoh they built for. Skilled, respected men do. So the picture historians now hold is completely different. This was an organized, state-run workforce, tens of thousands strong of largely free, fed, housed, and by the standards of the time, paid laborers. A corps of highly skilled full-time craftsmen, the masons, the surveyors, the specialists, supported by great rotating gangs of ordinary workers who very likely came in on a seasonal basis. And here's the detail I love as a project guy. We know they were organized into named crews, teams with a bit of pride and a bit of swagger. They scrawled their team names in hidden corners of the stone, The sort of thing my lads do when they scratch their initials in wet concrete. 4,500 years later, that graffiti is still one of the ways we know who did this. Real people, with names and a payroll. Try getting that past a modern safety inspector, an open work site, tens of thousands of men, 60 meters up, no harnesses, no hoardings, no method statement, no high-vis. But make no mistake, this was a managed operation, not a chaos of misery. Someone was running a roster. Someone was working out how many loaves it takes to keep a hauling gang on its feet through a shift, and ordering the grain weeks ahead so it was there when the mouths were. That is the least glamorous and most important job on any build, ancient or modern, and they had it nailed. It was, essentially, the biggest and best-run construction firm the world had ever seen, and it wouldn't be beaten for a very, very long time. Piece 2. The one everybody actually wants to know. How do you move a 2.5-ton block of stone across the desert with no wheels worth speaking of and no machine at all? The answer, for the land part of the journey, is the sledge. Not a cart, a sledge. A big wooden sled like a heavy sleigh with the block lashed onto it and teams of men hauling it along on ropes. And your first instinct and mine is, that's insane. Dragging a wooden sledge loaded with tons of stone across loose sand. The sand piles up in front of the runners, it grabs, it drags, you'd need an army just to shift one block. And you'd be right. On dry sand, it's brutal. But the Egyptians knew something. And here's where it gets lovely, because we didn't have to guess this one, they told us. And then modern physics went and checked their work. There is a painting on the wall of an ancient Egyptian tomb that shows a colossal statue being dragged along on exactly this kind of sledge, by rows of men on ropes. And right at the front of the sledge, painted clear as day, there's a man doing something that for years people assumed was just a ritual gesture. He is pouring water onto the sand directly in front of the runners. For the longest time, that was read as a religious act, purifying the path. But in 2014, a team of physicists in the Netherlands actually tested it. They took sand and sledges and they measured the friction, dry sand versus damp sand. And it turns out that man with the water jug was not doing a ritual. He was doing engineering. Get the amount of water just right, damp, not soaked, and the water binds the grains together, stiffens the surface, stops the sand from bulldozing up in front of the sledge. Their result: the right amount of moisture can cut the friction roughly in half. Roughly half. I want you, as a person who has never hauled anything, to feel what half the friction means on a payroll. It means you need about half the men on the ropes to move the same block. Have your haulage crew across 2 million blocks across 20 years, and you have saved a quantity of human labor that is almost impossible to picture. That is a genuine, physics-backed, cost-saving engineering decision, made 4,500 years ago with a jug of water. I flag it honestly. We're reading a lot into one painting and one modern experiment, and reasonable people debate the details. But the physics is real and the picture is right there on the wall. My foreman Mike is always looking for the shortcut that halves the effort, the clever, lazy trick that gets the job done with less. Well, Mike, mate, they beat you to it by 4,500 years, and their shortcut is still holding up a mountain. Right. Piece 3. And this is the one where I have to be most honest with you, because this is where the real argument is, and where anyone who tells you they know for certain is selling you something. You can drag your block along the flat. Fine. But this thing goes up 146 meters. At some point you have to lift more than 2 million blocks, some of them enormous, higher and higher and higher into the air. And they had no crane. So how did the stone go up? The honest answer is, we don't know for certain. What we have is a set of very good theories and a genuinely thrilling recent discovery and a lot of clever people still arguing. Let me lay out the options because the argument itself is beautiful. Option 1. The long straight ramp. You build an enormous ramp of earth and rubble running straight out from one face and you drag the blocks up the slope. Simple. The problem is arithmetic. To keep the slope gentle enough to haul heavy stone up, a ramp reaching the top of the pyramid would have to be preposterously long, maybe over a mile, and contain a volume of material that starts to rival the pyramid itself. You'd be building a second monument just to build the first. Most engineers look at that and wince. Option 2. The ramp that spirals up the outside, wrapping around the pyramid as it rises, like a road going up a mountain. That solves the length problem. It's much more compact. But it creates new headaches. You can't sight along the edges to keep your angles true if a ramp is covering them, and getting those heavy sledges around the tight corners at each turn would be a nightmare. Option 3, and this is a genuinely ingenious one, the internal ramp. This is the theory of a French architect named Jean-Pierre Houdin, who proposed that the outer part was raised with a modest external ramp for the lower levels. And then, for the upper two-thirds, the blocks went up a ramp built inside the pyramid, spiraling upward within the body of the structure itself, hidden from view. It's an elegant idea, and there are some intriguing hints that might support it. But it's a theory, not a proven fact, and plenty of experts aren't convinced. I flag it as exactly that, a clever hypothesis, not the answer. And then, option 4, the newest piece, and the reason this is a live and exciting field and not a dead one. In 2018, at an ancient Egyptian quarry called Hatnub, a place they cut a fine stone called alabaster, archaeologists found the remains of a steep ramp, and running up both sides of it were rows of post holes. Post holes, meaning there had been a line of stout wooden posts up either side of the ramp, and the leading interpretation is that those posts worked as anchor points for ropes, that a block on a sledge was hauled up the steep slope by men pulling in front, while other men used the posts as a kind of pulley, wrapping ropes around them to add their force and to hold the load from sliding back. A rope-hand post system that let them use a much steeper ramp than anyone thought possible, because the posts multiplied and secured the pulling power. Now, careful, that quarry is not the Great Pyramid, and it's a bit older, and we can't just paste the findings straight onto Giza. But it cracks the door open. It shows that these builders had rope and timber lifting techniques we'd underestimated, that they could work far steeper slopes than the simple long ramp models assumed. And that changes the whole ramp argument. So which was it at Giza? A long ramp, a spiral, an internal ramp, a steep ramp with rope assists, or, most likely if you ask me, some combination that changed as the pyramid rose. We genuinely do not know. And I want to say clearly that we don't know is not a gap for aliens to climb into. It's an open engineering problem, the honest frontier of real research, and people are still out there in the sand chipping away at it. When my intern Priya first started, she used to be embarrassed to say, "I don't know how that works yet." I had to teach her that on a real job. I don't know yet. Here are the 3 most likely answers. Here's how we'd test them. That's not weakness. That's the actual sound of engineering. And it's the honest sound of this whole question. Piece 4, and for my money this is the secret hero of the entire story, the part that gets least of the glory and did most of the work. Water, the river, logistics. Because here's a thing the pictures never quite tell you. Not all the stone is local. The bulk of the pyramid, the rough core blocks, was quarried right there, A stone's throw from the site, and that's a mercy. But the beautiful stuff wasn't. The fine, smooth, gleaming white limestone that once cased the entire outside, so the whole thing shone like a polished jewel in the sun, that came from quarries at a place called Tura, across the river. And the granite. Those monster granite beams over the king's chamber, the 25 to 80-ton ones, that granite came from Aswan. Aswan is about 800 kilometers up the Nile. 800 kilometers. That's like quarrying stone in one city and kneading it in another one several hundred miles away, and you have no trucks, no rail, no road worth the name. So how do you move 80 tons of granite 800 kilometers? You don't fight the desert. You float it. You use the river. The Nile was the motorway of ancient Egypt, and its yearly flood was the engine. Every year the river rose and spread across the land, and the Egyptians learned to time the heavy work with that flood, and to cut canals and harbors so that the water and the barges carrying the stone could be brought right up close to the building site. You load your colossal block onto a boat, you let the river take the weight that no number of men ever could, and you sail it almost to the foot of the pyramid. The single hardest part of the whole job, moving impossible weight over impossible distance, was solved not by muscle, but by understanding your river. And how do we know this isn't just a nice theory? Because in 2013, at a place called Wadi al-Jarf on the coast of the Red Sea, archaeologists found something that gave me chills when I first read about it. They found papyri, written documents, that are the oldest inscribed papyri ever discovered in Egypt, and among them was a work diary, the diary of a man named Merer. Merer was, in effect, a middle manager, a team leader, an overseer of a boat crew of about 40 men. And his diary is not poetry and it's not prophecy. It is a logbook. It records day by day what his crew did. And what his crew did in the reign of Khufu was ferry that fine Tura limestone by boat, across the Nile and along the canals, to the building site at Giza. We have in our hands the actual shipping records for the casing of the Great Pyramid, written by the foreman who ran the barges. I cannot tell you what that does to a construction man. That is a timesheet. That is a delivery manifest. 4,500 years old. Merer was doing the exact job that half my working life is made of: get the right material to the right place at the right time without the whole schedule falling apart. And he was doing it with boats and the flood and 40 men. And he was so on top of it that he wrote it down and the writing survived, and it says, yes, this is how. The stone came by water. The mystery has a foreman's logbook. And then, when the stone arrived, came the part that as a builder I find almost harder to believe than the moving of it. The fitting. Those casing stones, the smooth white ones, were dressed and set so precisely that the joints between multi-ton blocks are, in places, thin enough that you'd struggle to slide a card into them. Tons of stone, cut and finished by hand with copper tools and stone pounders and endless patient abrasion, and then fitted together so tightly the seams nearly vanish. No power tools, no diamond saws, just skill and measurement and time and men who had done it 10,000 times. On a good day with modern kit, I struggled to get a tiled wall dead flat. They did it on a monument you can see from space. And think about the discipline that fitting implies, because a joint like that isn't luck. It means someone measured and someone checked, and someone rejected the blocks that weren't good enough, and someone kept doing that block after block for years without letting the standard slip. On my sites, standards slip the moment nobody's watching and the deadline's tight. That's just human nature. That's Mike pouring in the rain. What holds a tolerance like this across 2 decades isn't a tool. It's a culture. A whole trained tradition of men who simply would not set a bad stone. That is rarer and harder to build than any machine, and you cannot buy it or import it. You have to grow it one apprentice at a time. So, let's step back and put the pieces together, because this is where the real surprise lies, and it's not the one you came for. You came, I bet, hoping I'd hand you the one lost trick. The secret. The clever gadget the Egyptians had and we forgot. And I've given you tricks: the wet sand, the rope and post ramps, the river, the flood, the sledges. They're real and they're wonderful, and each one is a genuine piece of the answer. But here's the thing I most want you to take away, the thing that took me years of looking at big builds to really understand. There is no single trick. That's the secret. The Great Pyramid was not solved by one brilliant invention. It was solved by 1,000 ordinary problems, each one handled competently at the same time for 20 years, without the whole thing falling apart. Think about everything that had to be true at once. Someone had to quarry the stone. Someone had to feed tens of thousands of workers every single day, which means someone had to grow the grain and bake the bread and brew the beer and catch the fish and haul it all in. Someone had to house them and manage the crews and settle the disputes and treat the injuries. Someone had to survey the ground and hold those impossible tolerances. Someone had to build the boats and read the flood and cut the canals and schedule the deliveries so Murr's barge arrived when the block was needed and not a month too late. Someone had to keep the whole payroll, the whole supply chain, the whole 20-year plan, coherent in a world with no computers, no telephones, no steel, no engines. That is the marvel, not a laser from the sky, not a lost machine. The single most impressive thing about the Great Pyramid is that a society 4,500 years ago could organize itself, could feed and house and coordinate and motivate tens of thousands of human beings toward one shared goal for a generation and hit it. That's the technology that built the pyramids. It wasn't magic. It was management. It was logistics. It was people in their thousands pulling, literally and figuratively, in the same direction. And I promise you, having spent my life watching modern projects with every tool imaginable fall to pieces over exactly that, over the human coordination of it, that is far, far harder and far rarer than any gadget. And here's where I turn it round on you, because I didn't walk you through all of this just to win an argument with people who like aliens. The reason we reach for the mystery, the reason it's so tempting to say someone must have helped them, is that, deep down, we've stopped believing that ordinary, organized people can do extraordinary things. We look at something huge and patient and coordinated, something that took a generation and a whole society rowing together, and part of us just can't picture it anymore. We're used to things being fast and individual and disposable. A monument that takes 20 years and tens of thousands of hands feels almost as alien to us as the aliens do. So when you look at this pyramid, I don't want you to feel small, and I don't want you to feel spooked. I want you to feel the opposite, because those were people. Not gods, not visitors, people, with backs that ached and feet that blistered and foremen who cut corners and a mirror somewhere keeping the books. People exactly like the ones you stand in line with and work beside and pass in the street. And they did this, which means the ceiling on what ordinary, organized, patient human beings can build together is higher, so much higher, than the tired, cynical, hurried version of us tends to believe. The pyramid isn't a monument to a lost secret. It's a monument to us at our most patient and our most coordinated. And every time I stand at the bottom of one, aching neck tipped back, I don't think, how did they? Not anymore. I think, Look what we can do when we decide something matters enough to do it properly and to do it together and to take our time. We haven't lost the technology. We built it with our hands and our organization. The only thing we ever really risk losing is the patience and the trust and the willingness to pull together for longer than a news cycle. That's the real ancient technique, and it's not gone. It's just waiting for us to remember we have it. So that's my question for you, and I do read the comments genuinely. Here it is. What's the biggest thing you've ever been a small part of building? A project, a team, a house, a business, a thing that took a lot of hands and a long time and a lot of coordination to pull off. What was your job in it, and did it hold up? I want to hear it. The whole point of today is that the big stuff is 1,000 small jobs done by ordinary people, and you've done some of those jobs. Tell me about them, down below. I'm going to go and lose another argument with Mike about whether we really need to pour concrete in the rain. The Egyptians would never. And try to convince Priya that we don't know yet is the most honest sentence in engineering. And if you liked standing at the foot of something impossible and actually working out how it was done, no mysteries, no nonsense, just materials and muscle and a river, then subscribe and come back, because next time I've got another one that's still standing, still holding, still quietly showing us up. My name's Dan. Mind the load. And the next time somebody tells you humans couldn't have built this, take them to the bottom of it, tip their head back and tell them the truth. We did, and we wrote down how.